Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. I got a message from YouTube today, and the title is "Your video has been removed from YouTube." And it reads in part, "Hi, the KMG show. As you may know, our community guidelines describe which content we allow and don't allow on YouTube. Your video, The KMG Show, episode 25, and it lists the title, which I'm not going to repeat, was flagged for us for review. Upon review, we've determined that it violates our guidelines and we've removed it from YouTube. We know that this might be disappointing, but it's important to us that YouTube is a safe place for all. If content breaks our rules, we remove it. If you think we've made a mistake, you can appeal and we'll take another look. Keep reading for more details. Content that violates YouTube's terms of service or that encourages others to do so is not allowed on YouTube. This removal has not resulted in a community guideline strike or penalty on your account. However, we still encourage you to review all of your content to make sure it's in line with our community guidelines. Additional violations could result in strikes against your account or even lead to account termination. First off, the tone of this message is exceedingly irritating. Hi, it says. How about hello? And that's Mr. Grace to you. But as someone tweeted in response to this, they would prefer if YouTube actually, wore a monocle. Yes, here it is. I would admire YouTube more if they wore a monocle and sneered as they crushed young and upcoming channels like this. The loathsome, hey, I'm your buddy language is the most disgusting thing about big tech censorship. But of course, it strikes me that, well, first of all, it was not explained to me in what way my video violated their community guidelines. I have an idea that it was simply because of the title, one word, which has become a popular hashtag. But again, I'm not going to say it in the same way that I'm not going to use the name of the so-called whistleblower because I know that leads to immediate your stream being shut down immediately, even though this fellow's name was reported again and again in the media and even mentioned by Donald Trump Jr. But no, this fellow has to be shielded for all time. Now, YouTube apparently is let me make this exactly right. YouTube is a safe place for all. It strikes me that potentially any statement that anyone makes on any subject could be regarded as controversial. And so if people were, inclined to take offense, what would that leave on YouTube? Makeover tips, body positivity videos, perhaps? To say, Yankees suck, go Red Sox. Well, there's a lot of people who are New York Yankees fans out there, and they might be terribly offended that someone has insulted their beloved Bronx Bombers. Again, all these binary divisions, Apple versus Microsoft, dogs versus cats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is it? What constitutes a safe place exactly? There are doubtless thousands or tens of thousands of videos on YouTube about how Donald Trump conspired with Vladimir Putin to steal the 2016 presidential election. This was investigated for years by Robert Mueller, and it was found that there was no proof of this. Now, obviously, this claim that Donald Trump is a traitor who works at the behest of a foreign leader is one that is quite damaging to a political and social cohesion in the United States, but the videos are still up there. What this all suggests to me is that a safe place means that we do not allow any opinions which are contrary to the hegemonic narrative. YouTube has said that it will not allow any material which contradicts the World Health Organization. But of course, people with long memories, that is to say, people whose memories go back to January, will remember that the World Health Organization, taking its cue from China, told the world that there was no proof that COVID-19 could be transmitted from person to person. Also, it was not really something to worry about, and also that the real pandemic was xenophobia, i.e. racism. The World Health Organization subsequently turned on a dime, and it's possible they may yet again turn on a dime. But I suppose if the, if the WHO said tomorrow that everyone must wear ventilators, or respirators, rather, I guess that would become the dogma which must be obeyed instantly by all. YT in the chat says, Chogo King, I would like a report on the status of pots and pans banging, please. Well, last night at 7 o'clock local time, I was in a Victoria Park, some distance from most housing, and the din was absolutely enormous. Just absolutely enormous. It seems to gain strength with the days. Ian Chadwick says, so pumped waiting for today's Anodyne generic headline. Well, that was my little joke because I've learned a little bit about YouTube, and I've discovered that if one's headline is suggests controversy, best to change it to something which is not going to offend anyone. Richard Spencer seems to endorse the WHO guidelines, says Matt Young. People still paying attention to that fellow? William Hicks says monkey grooming videos seem to be all right. I don't really know what that means. But okay. Marshall McLuhan wrote decades ago, going back to the 1960s, that mass media seem to be rewiring people's brains. McLuhan died before the internet became a reality. And what we have seen with the rise of the internet, and particularly with social media, is that it seems to have rewired women's brains in particular. That it seems to have made women, obviously not all women, but a great many of them, sexualize every single thing on earth. Sexualize them and infantilize them. This is a story from Los Angeles Magazine. It's not a parody. It's not April's Fools. This local brand is making Cuomo, Newsom, and Fauci underpants. And it's written by someone called Gwynedd Stewart. During the pandemic, several high-profile figures have become unlikely sex symbols, thanks to their valiant efforts to keep us all from dying painful, lonely deaths in the ICU, and to some degree, our rampant isolation-induced quarantine hornies. It is these very people that they are honoring with the sexy pants who have decided that we're not allowed to go about our normal lives. But never mind that. Cognitive dissonance is now a particular characteristic of our elite. LA-based clothing brand Canva is honoring New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, California Governor Gavin Newsom, and romance novel hero and heart-throbbing disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci with a line of women's underpants emblazoned with their names. Let's see, here is an Instagram post from them. Thirsty? We hear you, us too. We have been so impressed with Governor Cuomo since we've been in lockdown. We have created a limited edition, a New York City set of products that we're making as a thank you to him and the wonderful healthcare heroes in our beloved NYC. When you put his name on your undies, we will be matching dollar for dollar any NYC special edition product purchased with an equal product donation to healthcare workers in the NYC area. We want them to be able to rest, recharge, and relax as much as possible when they get home. Isn't that sweet? The limited edition line kicked off in late April with the Cuomo briefs and bikinis, which apparently led to demand for Newsom and Fauci versions. Canova prides itself on being a carbon-neutral, woman-owned, sustainable operation. So naturally, the virus hunks line is for a good cause. Can't decide on a pair? Supporting California healthcare workers is a no-brainer. But consider the Cuomo drawers do double duty if CNN anchor Chris is the object of your pandemic affections. You know, I've mentioned this a lot on Twitter that in the book that Shiva Naipaul wrote about Jim Jones and the Jonestown Massacre, he wanted to investigate the culture that Jim Jones came from, or the culture that made Jim Jones. Jim Jones was actually originally from Indianapolis. And then in the 60s, he moved to San Francisco, where he became a genuine political power in that city. His support and that of the People's Temple was sought by all manner of politicians in San Francisco. So Shiva Naipaul spent some weeks in the Bay Area and going to various New Age shows and such like. And he was absolutely appalled by what he witnessed. And he referred to the state of mind in the Bay Area as almost a universal mental retardation. Well, this universal mental retardation has actually become, well, universal. That let's honor Andrew Cuomo, who is the man that ordered nursing homes in the state of New York to take in people who had already been diagnosed with COVID-19, resulting in thousands of deaths. And this is the guy that makes women feel thirsty? Is it? I don't know. I suppose the power to, how would you say, engineer people's deaths, I suppose that could get women hot. Chris Cuomo, that guy, the guy who blew up at someone who called him Fredo, and then blew up at someone who pointed out that, hey, you're supposed to be under quarantine, and you've been telling everyone that you're in quarantine, and here you are out in public, and you're not wearing masks, and you're with your wife and your children and some other unnamed woman. And he blew up at this fellow, calling him a fat loser biker. These are the types of people that I guess that we must honor these days. So what's this about Dr. Fauci as a romance novel hero? Well, it's happened. And this is from Aditi Sangal from CNN. Dr. Anthony Fauci, a key member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, inspired the romantic hero in Happy Endings, a 1991 best-selling romance novel. Author Sally Quinn says she was looking for the perfect character to romance her protagonist, who was recently widowed in the second novel when she met Fauci. I had not met him before. I knew who he was because he was the famous AIDS doctor, she told CNN's Alison Camerotto on New Day. We just sort of immediately got into a very intense conversation, and I found him riveting and unbelievably attractive and charismatic. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was really sexy, she said. When I think of AIDS, this does not make me feel sexy. In fact, AIDS, death, right? And death or serious illness, wasting away to nothing, that doesn't make me thirsty. But then I guess, I'm not a woman and I'm not Sally Quinn. Fauci, who has been the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984, then became the basis for Michael Lanzer, a fictional National Institutes of Health scientist who romances protagonist Sadie Gray, the fictitious former First Lady, all while developing a cure for AIDS. Again, Anthony Fauci is a man who told people over and over again for years in the 1980s that everyone was at risk of getting HIV/AIDS. Everyone. No, no, no. It's not just a disease for homosexual men, IV drug users. No, no, no. It's everyone's disease. Well, it turned out that Dr. Fauci was spectacularly wrong about this. But it appears that when you reach a certain level in life, when elite or expert status is conferred upon you, this is, as Tom Wolfe would say, an unscrewable pooch. As we've seen with Professor Neil Ferguson, as we've seen with Imperial College London, there is no limit to the number of disastrous predictions that they make that turn out to be wholly wrong, that affects their status. Anyway, Sally Quinn continues. The protagonist in the book had been married to the president, who was a jerk, and she wasn't really in love with him, and he was totally in love with and involved with himself. And here was Tony Fauci, who, even though he was famous and, well respected and all that, didn't care about fame or money or power. He was just in it to do good, and that's very rare in Washington, by the way. So she based Lanzer's character on Fauci. Quinn also drew comparisons between the plot of the book and the current situation, saying that what Sadie Gray saw in Dr. Michael Lanzer is what everyone is seeing in Fauci today, as he speaks during the White House coronavirus press briefings. There's a petition now for him to be named sexiest man alive. He's become this great sex symbol, and it's kind of like, who knew? I just wrote it the way that I saw it, and suddenly here, 30 years later, it's all coming true, except that he's not having an affair with the First Lady. So who is Sally Quinn, you might ask? Sally Quinn was once a quite famous woman. She was born in 1941, and apparently now she writes about religion for a blog at the Washington Post. She was born in Savannah, Georgia, to a military family. And she graduated from Smith College, and she began at the Washington Post with very little experience. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. Reportedly called by Ben Bradley after a report of her pajama party in celebration of the election to Congress of Barry Goldwater Jr. And here we see this infantilization of journalism, which happens to be, I don't know, entirely coincidental with the introduction of large numbers of women to it. The job interview included the following exchange. "Can you show me something you've written?" said managing editor Benjamin Bradley. "I've never written anything," admitted Quinn. Pause. "Well," said Bradley, "nobody's perfect." The Washington Post, working for the Washington Post is one of the most prestigious jobs in journalism in the world. And as I learned back in the 90s, journalists at the Washington Post were the highest paid in the United States of America. And here's Sally Quinn, who gets taken on as a reporter with no experience whatsoever in journalism. And apparently she's never written anything. Gosh, I wonder how that could have happened. According to Wikipedia, Quinn soon demonstrated as a reporter for the paper's style section a talent for drawing out the subjects of her interviews and profiles. A notable incident of her career was her claim that Zbigniew Brzezinski, then the National Security Advisor, jokingly opened his fly in front of a reporter, a claim the Post retracted the following day. So apparently she did not get along with the Clintons. And Harry Jaffe wrote in Salon that Quinn's condemnation of Bill Clinton's adultery rang hollow, coming from someone who broke up the marriage of her boss, Ben Bradley, before going on to marry Bradley herself. How about that? So Sally Quinn She made her money in the traditional way. She married the boss. In 2010, the Washington Post published Sally Quinn's The Party, No Dueling Bradley Weddings, Just Scheduling Mistake, in print and online. The column alluded to Bradley family dysfunction and discussed her son's wedding, which she scheduled on the same day as the wedding of her husband's granddaughter. The column was considered inappropriate, and reader backlash was immediate, criticizing Quinn for airing family laundry and the Washington Post editors for printing it. By February 24, 5 days later, the Post canceled her column, which had been appearing in the religion section of the print edition. This was Quinn's last column for the printed newspaper. In 1973, Quinn tried her hand at television, joining CBS News reporter Hughes Rudd as co-anchor of the CBS Morning News. Okay, so this is a woman with no broadcasting experience who is offered a job in television, and it's not an intern, it's not some sort of flunky or anything. No, it's the co-host of the CBS Morning News. Golly, I wonder how that happens. 90 minutes before her television debut on August 6, 1973, Quinn collapsed while trying to fight the flu. Quinn's ad-libs during the show's first week tended toward the inappropriate. In one episode following a report on the children of California migrant farm workers, she quipped that child labor, quote, was how I felt when my mother and father made me clean up my room, unquote. 5 months after she began, she left the CBS Morning News telecast. And then she wrote a book about it. We're going to make you a star. Yeah. Journalism today. And in more female brain gone insane news, this is from the Daily Mail. Nurse who only wore underwear under transparent PPE gown on male hospital ward in Russia because she was too hot is disciplined, but the patients don't seem upset. Her revealing picture went viral after being taken by a patient at a hospital in Tula, 100 miles south of Moscow, who said there were no complaints from his bedfellows. And the Mail has conveniently provided a photo of this young woman. One can't see much of her head except for her eyes, but she seems like an attractive young woman. And of course, in no way was she seeking attention from men, because frontline healthcare worker would never do such a thing. When they post TikTok videos of themselves twerking or using IV stands and stripper poles, this is all in aid of fighting the virus. It is in no way, advertising for oneself, etc., etc. Hospital chiefs in Tula were not amused and punished the nurse for non-compliance with the requirements for medical clothing. The unnamed medic in her 20s said she was too hot wearing her nurse's uniform under the gown. She told her managers at Tula Regional Clinical Hospital that she did not realize the PPE she wore when treating coronavirus patients was so transparent. Yes, because of course women never look in the mirror before they leave the house. That would be so vain. Let's see. Her chiefs at first said the woman was wearing lingerie, but later claimed she had a swimming suit beneath her gown. The nurse has not spoken publicly on the incident, and the exact details of the disciplinary action were not revealed. One patient said there was no objection from men in the coronavirus ward, while admitting there was some embarrassment. A reader of local newspaper Tula News congratulated the nurse. At least someone has a sense of humor in this gloomy, gloomy reality, said Sergei Radnikov. Why the reprimand? Asked Albert Kuzminov. Another supporter said everyone shouted at her, but no one paid attention that she was dressed in this way because of the heat. Yes, she just decided to slip into something more comfortable, as the old movie cliche has it. A woman commenter, Marina Astakova, posted, "Well done. She raised the mood of the patients." And Valerie Kaplan wrote, "Why punish the nurse? You need to reward her. Seeing this outfit, no one wants to die." The incident came as the head of Russia's COVID-19 monitoring center, a former TV doctor, Alexander Myasnikov, shocked viewers with his blunt speaking on the coronavirus crisis. Quote, "The infection will anyway take its toll. It'll take its toll. We will anyway all get sick. Those who are supposed to die will die." By Tuesday, Russia had a total of 300,000 cases of the infection with an official death toll of 2,837. Many experts believe the Russian statistics underscore the true level of fatalities. Officially, Tula has had 2,637 infections with 19 deaths. Yes, experts. Now, you give them any figure on COVID, and if it's a high figure, they say it's not high enough. If you give them a low figure, they say this is obviously untrue. The number must be many, many times greater than this. How do you know that? Well, we know because we are the experts, and we are not to be doubted. What are the experts from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania saying? Well, according to the Mail, coronavirus infections could reach as high as 5.4 million in the US in the next 2 months, and more than 290,000 Americans could die if social distancing isn't adhered to, according to a COVID-19 forecast model from the Wharton School. This ominous forecast accounts for all states fully reopening without any social distancing measures. In comparison, the model predicts nearly 4.3 million cases and 230,000 deaths by July 24th if states reopen but individuals maintain their social distancing efforts. Okay, the number of new infections, reported number of new infections and deaths has been going like this for some time. But apparently, they're just going to explode for some reason, even though the virus has been out there for months now. And we know what happens with respiratory viruses of this type. They hit fast and hard, typically, and then they tail off. That's why in the past, when countries have suffered from influenza epidemics, which have resulted in many more deaths than COVID-19 has, society does not come to an end. But you see this fury at these states, like Georgia, say, which have largely opened up, with people in the media actually appearing to be cheering for Georgians to die, to punish them for what, being rednecks, for voting for Donald Trump. These two things, I suppose, are suggest the death penalty. Months ago, one of the ways in which the experts terrified us was saying that the coronavirus could be transmitted. It could be on surfaces and would be there for a long time. Metal surfaces up to 9 days. That's what they said. And what I said at the time is, if this is true, then everyone's going to get infected. Everyone is going to get infected. Now, this is according to the New York Post, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says that the coronavirus does not spread easily through touching surfaces or objects. Does this suggest that sanitizing counters and debit machines and the like, after every single customer uses them, the carts that one uses in supermarkets, which are routinely sanitized again and again, this rather suggests that this is not necessary, does it not? In early March, the Federal Health Agency was warning it may be possible to pass on the virus from contaminated surfaces. Its guidelines now include a section on ways the virus doesn't easily spread, including from touching surfaces or objects. Okay. So the experts told us, oh my God, surfaces are death traps. Got to be sanitized. Every time you touch a surface, you go and have to wash your hands afterwards. And now they're saying that isn't true. Is there an apology from the CDC for spreading all of this needless panic because I haven't learned of one. It may be possible that a person can get COVID-19 by touching a surface or object that has the virus on it and then touching their own mouth, nose, or possibly their eyes, the CDC webpage states. This is not thought to be the main way the virus spreads, but we're still learning more about this virus. So you're admitting that you don't really know all that much about the virus, and yet everyone was scared to death. Everyone was ordered to regard every other person on Earth as a deadly threat to them, and the economy was destroyed, and society was destroyed, and civil liberties were suspended, and now the Centers for Disease Control is admitting really doesn't know all that much about the virus. The Food and Drug Administration said last month there was no evidence to suggest the virus can spread through food or what's wrapped in it, and there was no need to wipe down groceries. The biggest issue is that people are picking up COVID-19 from other people. Marilyn Roberts, a microbiologist and professor at the University of Washington, previously told the Post they're not picking it up from surfaces. I don't know, maybe they'll change their mind about this. The Hill has a story. Will government mandate COVID-19 vaccinations? And this is by Merrill Matthews, who writes, when a COVID-19 vaccine becomes available, I will be one of the first in line. But the fact is, US adults tend to have low vaccination rates. If the government determines that vaccinations are essential to stemming the spread of the disease, could it mandate vaccination compliance? Apparently it can, and it might. Many medical experts believe that developing one or more COVID-19 vaccines is the key to reopening the economy and returning to our normal lives. For example, the Mayo Clinic says a vaccine to prevent coronavirus disease in 2019, or COVID-19, is perhaps the best hope for ending the pandemic. The pharmaceutical industry has shifted into overdrive to find a vaccine effective against the coronavirus. Drug maker AstraZeneca hopes to have 30 million doses of its vaccine available in the UK by September. And Moderna just announced very promising results from its initial clinical trials. There's a rule associated with the FDA that the drug companies complain that it takes something like 10 years and $1 billion to have a new drug approved. Now, as I discovered in my researches on this subject, this is humble bragging by the drug companies. There aren't very many drug companies left. They just merge and merge and merge and become larger and larger and more powerful, and they have plenty of money. The fact that it takes so long and costs so much money to get a drug approved, this is a barrier to entry, as economists say. But apparently this vaccination is going to be rush released. And of course, that doesn't suggest in any way that something could go terribly wrong with this vaccination, because let's say, the confidence which these companies have suggests that agreement has already been made that we are going to approve this. And again, this does not fill me with confidence. The CDC encourages adults to be immunized for a range of diseases. The flu vaccine leads the CDC's list that includes tetanus and diphtheria every 10 years, shingles, pneumonia, and several others. Consider the flu vaccine. It is one of the most affordable and accessible vaccines available, and yet the CDC reports the adult vaccination rate over the past decade has ranged between 40 and 45%. Fortunately, the same 10-year graph shows a much higher flu vaccination rate among older Americans, between 65 and 68% for seniors, but only about 30 to 35% for 18 to 49-year-olds. Children typically have much higher vaccination rates because all states require them, with certain exemptions before children can enroll in public schools. Yeah. Even so, it isn't clear that enough adults will choose to be vaccinated to create a herd immunity when roughly 60–80% of the population has developed immunity to a disease either by vaccination or having been infected and recovered. Epidemiologists say that's what's needed to end the epidemic. Curiously, there aren't any epidemiologists quoted in this story, And it turns out that there are quite a few people in this field who say that the number of people required, the percentage of people required to create herd immunity is much lower than the figure quoted in the Hill, 60 to 80%. But it seems to have been decided at the highest levels that a vaccine is going to be rushed released, and then everyone is going to be forced to get an injection. So I was thinking, one of the things that this pandemic has taught us is who is considered important in society and who is considered unimportant. And we've learned that the very old are not considered essential in any way because deliberate decisions were made that killed them in large numbers. In America, in Canada, and in the United Kingdom. So they're not important. Hedge funds, on the other hand, very important indeed. Institutional investors, very important. This is from CNBC. S&P 500 closes at highest since early March as Facebook and Amazon hit records and the Dow up 300 points. Stocks rose sharply on Wednesday, building on this week's gains as traders increased bets of an economic recovery with more states easing stay-at-home orders. Tech shares led the gains. Facebook shares rallied more than 6% to reach a record high. Amazon also hit an all-time high, closing higher by 2%. Facebook's gains came as investors cheered the company's new e-commerce Facebook Shops, while Amazon continues to benefit from consumers ordering online. Yes, I suppose if one is locked into one's home, the temptation is to stare at a screen all day long. And since apparently going to a store, many of which are shut, why not just order everything from Amazon? You don't need to leave your house. The van will drive up, deposit everything you need on your doorstep. Connecticut began allowing consumers to dine in at restaurants with outdoor seating on Wednesday, and some shops also began reopening. That move came a day after New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said the outbreak is back down to where it started. So again, we learn what's important and what isn't. I mentioned this phrase, universal mental retardation. Okay, here's another example of this. This is a story from the New York Post. Illegal immigrants living in California can begin applying for financial assistance as part of a statewide relief effort to help those without legal status access disaster relief amid the coronavirus pandemic. The $75 million landmark relief program is the first of its kind, offering payments of up to $500 per person and up to $1,000 per household. Launched by Governor Gavin Newsom last month, the initiative will work with 12 nonprofit organizations to disperse the aid to individuals who are otherwise excluded from federal relief programs or unemployment assistance, probably because they have committed a crime. They are not legal residents. In order to qualify, applicants will be required to show that they are ineligible for federal assistance programs related to the coronavirus pandemic, including the CARES Act passed by Congress. The nonprofits will help applicants determine if they qualify for the state relief, apply for it, and deliver the one-time payment cards to those who are approved. The state hopes to help a projected 150,000 immigrants without legal status through the effort. The funds will be available on a first-come, first-served basis until they are depleted or until June 30th at the latest. Gavin Newsom said when unveiling the effort, every Californian, including our undocumented neighbors and friends, should know that California is here to support them during this crisis. The governor added that about 10% of the state's workforce is undocumented, saying that while they paid over $2.5 billion in local and state taxes in 2019, they were left unable to benefit from the federal government's relief funds. Apparently the governor did not add that these illegal immigrants cost far more in tax dollars, taxpayer benefit, than they pay in state and local taxes. Because people who earn very little money in the United States have available to them a number of funds to top up their income. And when McDonald's and Walmart, to give two examples, hire people in the United States, they give them pamphlets letting them know about all of the money that they can get from Uncle Sucker, because the two companies do not pay enough money for people to get by. And of course, what you can't expect companies to, hire their own people over foreigners, because, then they'd have to raise wages. And we know that high wages are very, very bad. And they're very, very bad because it means that companies make less in profits. We can't have that. Now, let's hear from another expert who claims that a prediction he made about COVID-19 was correct. This is a story from the Times of Israel. An Israeli professor who made waves in early April for insisting that the coronavirus will play itself out after 70 days, regardless of intervention levels, says that he has been proved right, and that claims the virus will remain in force for a second wave are just speculation. It's very amusing that people talk about a second wave, said Isaac Ben Israel, a prominent mathematician, chairman of Israel's space agency, and a former general, said. How do they know there will be a second wave? And how do they know that it will come in the winter? However, a public health expert disputed Ben Israel's claims and said he has no clue about epidemiology and public health. Oh dear, dueling experts. Ben Israel said that, by the way, Professor Neil Ferguson is not an epidemiologist. He is not a medical doctor. His PhD is in theoretical physics, but it was his black box model that is largely responsible for the destruction of the world's economy. So I guess, as I say, some people get a pass, a lifetime pass. Ben Israel said that since he crunched numbers on the pandemic some 6 weeks ago and publicized his theory that COVID-19 peaks after about 40 days and declines to almost zero after 70 days, he has been vindicated and concluded that the hysteria he sees around him is as contagious as biological diseases. What is more, he is now arguing that surprise over the radically different mortality rates among infected people in different countries is misplaced, and is putting forward a counterintuitive claim. Quote, there is a natural assumption that fewer infections means fewer deaths, but it's not correct. There is no explainable relationship between the number of people infected and the number of people who die. The ratio between deaths and infections differs, sometimes by a factor of 100 or more between different countries. He asserted that mortality rates are unfathomable by any understood logic. Yes, so I don't know. Very controversial statement. Okay. What are we talking about in the chat? We're talking about Anatoly Karlin. Matt Young says, the guy who slept with a married woman and broke the rules he himself set in place. Yes, that is the fellow. As I pointed out, it's a very attractive blonde German woman. But no, he did break the rules. And of course, Pierre Trudeau has broken the rules, and Doug Ford has broken the rules, and the mayor of Chicago has broken the rules, and it goes on and on and on. But again, these people have passes. John Berkshire says the Club of Rome and the Bilderbergers are all neo-Malthusians. Yeah, this is very worrying to consider, I must say. That I'm not saying that there was a plan behind this, not necessarily, but I'm saying that it seems to be working out pretty well for people who hold some pretty dire beliefs. Kat Black in the Off Guardian writes 10 steps to turn a pandemic into the brave new normal. And the background to this is, imagine you were one of the richest people to ever exist, and your vast network of wealth and influence was based on some imaginary money and the widely cultivated belief that there is no alternative. Now imagine the lies which secure your position are suddenly and violently challenged. Imagine yellow vested protests in the streets of Paris, an independence referendum in Catalonia, anti-globalists on the left and right surging in popularity all around the world. Imagine Brexit and Bitcoin and Pirate Bay and the myriad tiny ways people won't do what they're told. What you're suffering from is a loss of control of the narrative. What you need really is a new story. Something to instill everyone with a sense of common purpose, to frighten them and distract them and keep them busy. You need a threat. Something that will make everyone come together, to put aside divisions and hate and all work together to face a common enemy. And enemies, like cakes and lemonade, are always far more satisfying when you make them yourself. Here are 10 steps you should employ if you want to turn something into a global power grab. 1, start with a poorly defined virus, add an inaccurate test for it, encourage as many terminally or critically ill people as possible to be repeat tested until they test positive. 2, report your inevitably very high death rates and get vague about whether these people died of the virus or simply with it. 3, create a response to the crisis that rolls out a vast network of authoritarian measures, some of which have been in planning for a long while and only a minority of which have any possible application to pandemic prevention. Make sure to cancel elections until further notice and to hugely increase police powers of arrest and surveillance. 4, shut down your hospitals to all but COVID cases. Cancel elective surgeries, kidney dialysis, cancer treatments, normal GP consultations, and all non-emergency healthcare, thus inevitably increasing all-cause mortality. 5, change your laws in numerous ways to allow almost all of these new deaths to bypass normal checks and balances and be easily diagnosed as COVID-19 related, either with the inaccurate test or simply by clinical presentation. 6, in case some attending medics are reluctant to go along with this, change the law to allow a single MD who may never even seen the patient in question to diagnose COVID-19 at his or her own discretion. 7, report the startling numbers of new cases you find as a result of these various manipulations as evidence for how essential the new authoritarian measures are for saving lives. 8, with no sense of irony, introduce mandatory do not resuscitates for any demographic you consider useless eaters. If challenged, talk about human suffering, limited healthcare resources, and ventilators. 9, don't forget to add any ensuing deaths to the COVID-19 totals. 10, make sure the media calls anyone who questions any part of this a conspiracy theorist. Not only will these 10 steps allow you to create a quasi-fascist police state, but the chattering classes will actually criticize you for not being enough of a police state and beg for more. No doubt some will say this is excessively cynical, maybe even conspiratorial, but is it? Since February 2020, we have dedicated the site to bringing you the factual reality of the entity called the COVID-19 pandemic. We have done this using official statistics and data and the ignored testimony of experts in the field. What has the orthodox story brought in the same time frame? The claim for this being a unique pathology requiring unique levels of intervention is being made every day in virtually every mainstream outlet, many alt news outlets, and by virtually every major government and health-related NGO. It's a deafening cacophony, a 24/7 bullhorn of fear and certitude, a fog of headlines and speculation and what-ifs, and some experts claim, and forests of unsourced or unexplained numbers. But what is it based on? What data, what statistics, what observations are forming the basis of the narrative? Is there anything solid behind the noise? Despite the atmosphere of panic being generated and despite frequent usage of epithets like deadly virus in the popular press, no one is claiming that COVID-19 kills a lot of people. In fact, quite the opposite, as we pointed out recently. The very same sources that are promoting the need for unique action over this virus will tell you in the next breath that there is nothing uniquely dangerous about it all. And I've mentioned this many times on this live stream. For instance, government ministers in Britain saying panic, 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 panic. Oh, and by the way, here's the actual truth. According to the UK's chief medical officer, 80% of those infected will get no symptoms or a mild cold. Only a tiny minority will even need treatment in hospital, and even of those, the vast majority will survive. So what in actual real world terms is being claimed? If the problem isn't that the virus kills a lot of people, what is the problem? The only response to that is to talk about health services being overrun due to the R0. And if you can take that number in isolation and have it mean something, It is nonsense. A high R0 is not concerning if the virus is harmless to many people who encounter it. The common cold virus has an R0 between 2 to 3, pretty much the same as SARS-CoV-2. It also can kill vulnerable people, sometimes in large numbers. So if this argument makes sense, we should be locked down permanently for fear of catching a sniffle. The RO argument used to get additional cred from referring to the imperial model and its prediction that the health service would be overrun if some kind of lockdown was not enforced, but this is more than problematic. The imperial model has now been widely discredited, and its author, Neil Ferguson, exposed as a serial incompetent or serial data fudger for the government or the Gates Foundation. It can no longer be used to support either the claim for uniqueness or the argument for lockdown. There's nothing to show that it does either very well, if at all. Which means the entire flatten the curve meme is also discredited, by the way. Far from being overrun, the NHS is virtually shut down, apart from those almost empty COVID-19 wards. Yet, apparently, it's going to take the UK government 12 months to get elective surgeries back. Because, reasons. COVID-19 reasons. Not an opportunistic bid to finally shut down and privatize or otherwise commandeer the NHS. That's definite. Seriously, though, people, if you think there's any coherence, rational thought, or data behind the global Gatesian official position, please tell me where it is. And I've talked many times before about how our elite seems to believe that cognitive dissonance is a virtue, that they can believe two contradictory things at the same time with equal passion. And I'll give you an example, one I've used before, that Donald Trump is a drooling, Cheeto-faced moron. Donald Trump is also a sinister mastermind who is the greatest threat that the world has ever seen. Well, both of those things cannot be true, but we hear from the media that they are true, and we hear it over and over again, that they will say, make claim number one, drooling moron, one day, and the next, sinister mastermind. Mike F. says we'll probably go back to the Middle Ages, in my opinion. Yeah, if that is true, then we are truly talking about a Malthusian die-off. And wait till the numbers start coming in and what the explanation for this will be. John Barksher says, unless we go back to the Middle Ages or in some other way create pre-industrial revolution conditions, birth rates will continue to decline. Well, birth rates are declining. Well, one of the main reasons why birth rates have declined so much is that it's been demonstrated everywhere in the world that the more education women get, the less likely they are to have children. With the result that the Parsis of Asia, who formerly known as Zoroastrians, it is now predicted that that entire tribe will disappear within 3 generations. Matt Young says you can't uninvent the baby pill. No, you can't, but the conditions where, let's say, sexual intercourse is regarded as a form of fun or self-expression, rather than a means for procreation, that could change. I've speculated in the past that since we're all so terrified of pandemics now, what if there was a new form of sexually transmitted disease which was found to be quite dangerous, and there were no antibiotics that could be used to treat it? Funny thing with AIDS is that, lockdown. Homosexuals were not quarantined. IV drug users were not quarantined. In fact, there were vicious debates that broke out whether bathhouses, which were one of the main incubators of the disease, should be shut down. Oh, this is a threat to our civil rights, to our sexual rights. But I suppose that's because there was one particular group, or particularly powerful group, that was threatened, as opposed to threatening everybody on Earth. Okay. John O'Neill says, I like President Trump. I like him too. And the argument is going to be made is that he hasn't fixed all the problems in the United States. Well, it was unrealistic to expect this. And Tom Anderson chimes in to say that the virus is at least as bad as they are saying, probably worse, probably 5-10 times worse. I don't know, maybe Neil Ferguson will be right and he'll get his 2.2 million debt in the United States. Okay, so back to it. There's a piece on Medium from Jonathan Tepper. And let's see, this is a very long piece by John Tepper at Medium. He's the Chief Investment Officer of Prevet Capital and founder of Variant Perception. And there's a note, the writer has absolutely no medical or epidemiological qualifications. All sources to medical journals and newspaper articles are hyperlinks in this piece. Read them yourself, do your own thinking. It is clear many policymakers are not. The piece is called Ground Zero, when the cure is worse than the disease. Every disease has its patient zero, and for the coronavirus COVID-19, patient zero was Wei Guixian, a 57-year-old woman who worked as a seafood merchant in Wuhan's Hunan market. At the market, social media images show that meat was traded alongside live bats, rats, snakes, wolf pups, and koalas. Now, the government of China and others are claiming that this is absolutely not true. And of course, we heard from a Chinese person in Canada last week lecturing us that no, Chinese do not eat bats. Yeah, we seem to be witnessing a collapse of rationality, that we've moved to a kind of Schrodinger's cat situation, where something is true or not true, depending on who says it or who believes it. There's a piece from Summit News by Paul Joseph Watson, and one of the things about crises is they allow people to pursue grudges, vendettas. Police in Toledo, Ohio were forced to give people a different number to report citizens who were not social distancing after 9/11 lines were flooded with calls. If you have a concern about people not social distancing at bars and restaurants, please call the Lucas County Health Department, states a tweet from the Toledo Police Department. The department had to clarify that the advice was given because too many people were calling 911 to try to report others. We are posting this because people are tying up the 911 lines to report others who are not socially distancing. Our goal is to provide the appropriate number for people to call instead of them calling 911. Well, since we have learned that COVID-19 is the only essential disease, and cancer and kidney disease, heart disease, the rest of it, it's not really important, not essential. We can just stop doing all measures to treat that. Perhaps the police should recognize that failure to observe social distancing is the only true crime. Now, all the other things, murder, robbery, theft, rape, assault, etc., they're not all that important anymore. And we know that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, intends to open the prison gates because the lockdown is the thing. Now, and as I'm sure, all of the released, murderers, rapists, robbers, pedophiles, and the like, everything will be fine so long as they observe social distancing. Watson writes, the coronavirus pandemic has been a golden age for the resurgence of the tattletale. As we previously reported, a woman called the police on a family because they were outside on their front yard weightlifting during the coronavirus lockdown. Some Californians are also reportedly calling the authorities if they hear neighbors coughing or sneezing inside their own houses. Karens across the city of Toledo must be gleefully rubbing their hands together at the prospect of being to grass up wrongdoers to the authorities. Toby Young at Lockdown Skeptics talks about, the collapse of Britain's economy. The Telegraph's business section leads on Rishi Sunak's warning to the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee yesterday that the country is facing a severe recession, the likes of which we haven't seen. That red line shooting beyond Sunak's nose is the number of unemployment claims triggered by different financial shocks dating back to 1970, and the 857,000 new claimants shown in the graph for 2020 is just for the month of April. The Telegraph points out that this is the biggest surge in benefit claims since 1947. The same point was made more bluntly on Channel 4 News by former Conservative leader Ian Duncan Smith. The longer we stay on lockdown, the more companies will go bankrupt. The Express has the same story, as does the FT, which quotes the Chancellor warning the committee that the economy may not immediately bounce back. Of course, entirely coincidental, I don't want to make too much of this, that all the companies that go bankrupt, well, people who used to patronize these stores can simply patronize Amazon instead. But that's just a coincidence. The Edinburgh Evening News looks at some of the many human tragedies caused by the response to the virus. The story of Del Keith, mother of one, Karen Hilton, whose life expectancy has been cut from 12 months to 6 after cancer trials were halted as doctors prioritized patients with COVID-19. She says, at the moment, I'm on chemotherapy, but because of the nature of my disease, which is triple negative and very aggressive, and there are only so many options that I can get. After you've exhausted all of the chemotherapies, my only options left are trials. Trials haven't been happening. They're not going to be focusing on research, and there's already 450 cancer patients dying every day. But you don't see those figures published along with the stats for COVID. It's heartbreaking, and sanity must prevail in that you can't just cut off the lifelines of all of these hundreds of thousands of patients. Obviously, they're diverting attention away from breast cancer trials onto COVID, and our issue is that it's just another disease. COVID is going to be around for a long time, but cancer patients won't if we don't get access to these trials. It just feels like they're cutting off the stage 4 cancer patients' lifelines, so it's literally life or death. Well, again, if these people are not treated and they die 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years before they would have with treatment, this saves governments an enormous amount of money in medical costs and in pension costs. But again, just a coincidence. The Guardian deals more fully with the impact of the lockdown on cancer patients, saying thousands of people could die early because so many hospitals have suspended surgery for the disease while the NHS battles the coronavirus. And the Telegraph also reports that the country is heading for a divide on the reopening of schools, with Government Minister Robert Buckland this morning conceding a uniform start from June the 1st is unlikely. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. I've mentioned it before, and I've shown the source, that the chief medical administrator of the Australian province of Queensland boasted that she had schools shut down, all the schools shut down in that Australian state, not because of any threat to the children, which she conceded was very, very small risk, but that she wanted to prove a point, that this was serious. So we have this woman in a powerful position boasting that she suspended the education of children in Australia just to show what a big shot she was. The British Medical Association now says schools can reopen on June 1st or earlier, as long as it is safe to do so, in what is described as an apparent softening of its stance regarding pupils returning to the classroom, admitting that there is growing evidence that the risk to individual children from COVID-19 is extremely small. Dr. Peter English, chair of the British Medical Association's Public Health Medicine Committee, points out that even though sending children back to school is not risk-free, keeping them at home isn't either. The Daily Mail writes about what it calls the cynical tactics of a teachers' union trying to stop schools reopening. It reports on Zoom video footage available on the National Education Union's YouTube account, which shows leaders discussing how to threaten headmasters who try to get their staff back to work. In a further sign of their hardline approach, they described their opposition to the date as a negotiating position. Mary Boosted, the NEU's Joint General Secretary, was even shown accusing children of being mucky, spreading germs, and wiping their snot on your trousers or on your dress. Well, it seems to me that if these teachers really hate children that much, they have made a bad career decision. Perhaps they should find something else to do. And I really don't see why are these people still getting paid? You know that these people are cheering on the lockdown because it's a pretty good deal when you're not doing your job and you're still getting paid. At least 13 mainly labor councils are actively opposing Boris Johnson's plans to open schools on June the 1st, as parents who want their children back in class claim they have been branded teacher bashers. Extraordinary rows have broken out on WhatsApp groups and online forums as it was revealed that up to 1,500 English primary schools are now expected to remain closed in 12 days' time, despite millions of children being at home for more than 8 weeks. On Mumsnet today, a thread suggested that parents aren't allowed to criticize teachers anymore and sparked outrage among those in the teaching profession. One parent wrote, "I've seen a lot of parents genuinely concerned about the teaching who are immediately accused of teacher bashing and being too lazy to teach their own children. It's ridiculous." Well, maybe if wages were raised, we stopped hiring illegals, we stopped importing foreigners in the millions, maybe wages could rise to the point where women could stay at home and raise their own children and, teach them as well. And then these teachers who hate students so much wouldn't have to lower themselves by having contact with them 5 days a week during the school year. Cambridge University has announced all lectures will be online for the duration of the next academic year. Cambridge didn't close during World War II and didn't close during any of the recent influenza pandemics with a higher death toll than SARS-CoV-2, such as 1968-70. But the university's administrators have decided that the risk posed by the current virus is simply too great. A press release announced, given that it's likely that social distancing will continue to be required, the university has decided there will be no face-to-face lectures during the next academic year, a press release announced. This followed the disclosure from Manchester University that its lectures will be online next term. Neither university has offered to reduce tuition fees as a consequence, which may be an oversight if they want to persuade students who've accepted places this year not to defer. Well, again, if these people can't be bothered to come to work, maybe their salaries should be adjusted accordingly, and the tuition fees should be adjusted accordingly. Or maybe Cambridge University never needs to reopen at all. Perhaps that should be considered. Because when's the lockdown going to end? Well, apparently when the virus is eradicated or we have a vaccine, that could be a very, very long time. And the longer these universities don't teach, the more voices are going to be raised asking the question, why are we paying these places so very much money? Why are young people going so deeply into debt for these places which apparently do not need to exist physically? The Guardian lays bare the scale of the problem facing British universities, saying they face a £760 million pound hole in their finances from deferrals alone. How about that? A survey of students applying for undergraduate places found that more than 20% said they were willing to delay starting their courses if universities were not operating as normal due to the coronavirus pandemic, which would mean there would be 120,000 fewer students when the academic year begins in autumn. The results, released by the University and College Union, come as universities are wrestling with how to reopen campuses for students while protecting them from COVID-19. Well, perhaps part of this new normal that we keep hearing about will be there will be a rethink on the need for every person to have some form of post-secondary education, regardless of their intellect or their interest in doing so. British universities are facing a perfect storm going into the next academic year. Lots of students who were supposed to be starting this autumn will defer. Applications for the following year will decline. EU students will have to pay full fees for the first time, meaning fewer will apply. And foreign students in general will stay away due to travel restrictions and fear of contagion. The sector is clearly hoping the government will bail it out, but that may be naive. The Guardian reported on May the 3rd, university leaders had asked the government for a bailout running into the billions of pounds to make up for lost international student and research revenue, but the plea on behalf of the sector was said to have landed badly with the Treasury. Now, I believe I brought up this question last week. The question is, what is the purpose of a university or college? And just to briefly recap, if you go back to the Middle Ages, the University of Oxford, University of Paris, their purpose was to train priests. And this they did for hundreds of years, but then their brief got a little wider. And essentially by, I don't know, the year 1900 or so, they were training people to be leaders in society. Now, a man called Clark Kerr, who was chancellor of the University of California, I believe around 1960, he came up with this idea of the multiversity, which essentially means that university is whatever you want it to be, which resulted in the 1960s with an explosion of building and the hiring of many, many, many new professors and many more people than previously attending university. And as I say, it's gotten to the point now where, well, everyone has to go to university or college. Why? Well, because you do. What do you get out of it? Well, what you get out of it was that you went to university or college. Again, it's a tautology. As we learn, with the increasing popularity of gender studies, black studies, etc., 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 that it is quite possible for students to be granted a degree after 4 years and know very little about the world or its history. Jay Leno had a feature on his program for many years where he would ask college students rather simple questions about American or world history, and they picked the ones where students were clueless. From my own experience working at a university for 12 years, I mean, this did not surprise me. The level of ignorance I saw in general from these students was really shocking. And again, I wondered why they were there. I suppose it's it's considered to be not de trop, but it's considered to be just not quite on, not having gone to college. But it turns out that this costs an enormous amount of money, leads to gross indebtedness, and now the universities are saying, no, actually, we're not going to have classes anymore because we're afraid. And I got to think that people are going to say, okay, fine. If we don't need colleges, we don't need colleges. My own view is that, I don't know, let's say top 5% of students should go to universities and be given, a full ride. But I realize that the problem with that is with swats and with cheaters, because it's pretty easy to game the system. Let's see, Gerald de Groot, a former member of the St. Andrews History Department, wrote in Unheard, many universities were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. A lingering dispute over pensions had corroded morale. The overemphasis on research, imposed largely by the government, had warped priorities, leading to a decline in teaching quality everywhere. Mounting student debt led many young people to question whether the ivory tower experience is worth the investment. The virus is ruthless. It exposes and punishes those weaknesses. Over the long term, some institutions might be forced to close, while others will have to radically transform the product they offer. Now, counterintuitively, one might say, it turns out that the percentage of COVID deaths that have occurred in care homes in the United Kingdom is significantly lower than Germany, France, Sweden, Belgium, Norway, and the worst country, which is Spain, at around 65%, and the UK is on 21%. Now, yes, it has been asked it's been suggested that many of the deaths could be avoided if politicians and their scientific advisors had realized sooner that COVID-19 was primarily a nosocomial disease. That is to say that one gets sickened in hospitals and long-term care homes. If hospitals and retired homes are one of the main transmission vectors, and the disease and the virus overwhelmingly affects the very old and sick who have multiple existing conditions, shutting the entire economy will not solve the problem. But it will show that the government is doing something, which appears to be what's required. It's an amusing cartoon from The Spectator of a English policeman wearing one of those stupid yellow vests, holding a bullhorn, and there is a stereotypical looking criminal inside a house, and he yells out, "I'm not coming out, copper." The policeman says, "Thank you." Because again, you know, it's only one really serious crime now, and that is flouting social distancing. Now, Lord Sumption, who is a former member of the United Kingdom Supreme Court, was an early skeptic of the prevailing wisdom on COVID-19, and he has he's now considered a bad man by the elite. Toby Young writes, "I'll save Lord Sumption the trouble of having to respond to the societal risk argument and do so myself. If we end the lockdown tomorrow, there is zero risk of basic supply chains breaking down, shops running out of food, checkout clerks leaving tills unattended, petrol delivery stopping, or any of the other calamities the lily-livered Compton," that's a critic of Sumption, "envisages. None of these things have happened in those countries that have ended their lockdowns, nor have they happened in those countries and U.S. states that never locked down in the first place. As Lord Sumption has repeatedly said, the burden falls on those who want to suspend our liberties to show that not doing so would be catastrophic. For instance, that not doing so will cause a net loss of life. To date, the British government has come nowhere near meeting that threshold." Now, there's obviously an enormous class divide in one's consideration of the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, those people who are being paid to stay at home because of the so-called essential nature of their employment and can afford to have, you know, all their meals delivered to them, those people are going to have a different view than you know, the deplorables, the proles who want to go to Arby's. And I've noticed very strongly in the last few days that the media, or certainly a great part of it, is using the COVID-19 affair as an excuse to heap abuse on the heads of those people who are poorer and less educated than themselves. So we've talked about universities, and yeah, okay, let's talk about China, because things seem to be moving very quickly with regard to the relations of the Western countries to the People's Republic. This is from Steve Watson on Summit News. A Bloomberg poll has revealed that an overwhelming majority of Americans would be willing to spend more money on products if they are manufactured outside of China, with 40% saying they simply will not buy anything made in China at all. In addition to these findings, 55% said that they do not believe China can be trusted to fulfill its trade deal commitment to buy more U.S. products, while 66% said they favor raising import restrictions over the pursuit of free trade deals as a better way to boost the U.S. economy. The findings come as President Trump announced that he now feels differently about the trade deal he signed with China earlier this year. We'll see what happens, Trump said, but it's been a very disappointing situation. Very disappointing thing happened with China because the plague flowed in and that wasn't supposed to happen and it could have been stopped. Once the virus came in, once the plague, as I call it, came in, I said, how did they let that happen? And how come it didn't go into other sections of China? Why did they block it from leaving Wuhan? But they didn't block it from going to the rest of the world, including the United States. Why is that? Beijing doesn't have it. Other places don't have it. The president touted trade deals that the U.S. has with other countries. People don't realize the amount of business that we do with Canada and with Mexico is monumental. It is the biggest trade deal in the world, bigger than the deal we made with China. Most people don't know, and the China deal is kicking in. Earlier this month, Trump tweeted that 100 trade deals with China wouldn't make up for the plague from China. Now, an obvious question that should be asked is why has the United States become so dependent on China? Why has Canada become so dependent on China? Why have so many Western countries become so dependent on China? And I'll tell you the answer. It is because rich people decided that they were not rich enough, that jobs had to be outsourced, is the word. Companies had to be right-sized, that it really irritated capitalists that they were paying their workers decent salaries, salaries that allowed them to get married, to have children, to buy a house, etc., etc. And that was simply wrong. These people were not of the right class. They didn't deserve these privileges. And, the billionaires decided that, a better system would be one in which they could afford, 400-foot yachts and the like. And maybe they could, have 2 Gulf Streams instead of 1. But this was sold to us on the basis, globalism, neoliberalism was sold to us on the basis of efficiency, that the aggregate of production is larger. Oh, okay, fine then. But what's the distribution of the wealth in the Western countries affected by neoliberalism? That's not relevant. Well, no, it is relevant because I don't live in the world. I live in a specific place. And I've noticed that there don't seem to be many good jobs left in this place. And this seems to be the result of a specific economic policy or series of policies to put Westerners out of work. And the rich get richer and the natives get replaced, is how it works. This is from investing.com. Senate passes bill, and this happened by unanimous voice vote, by the way. And what this tells me is it's not just the Republicans behind this. Senate passes bill aimed at boosting oversight of Chinese companies. Bill could require Chinese companies to delist from U.S. exchanges. Bill would also require Chinese companies to certify no foreign government control. And the Bipartisan Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act by Senators Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, and Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, by unanimous consent that would, quote, kick Chinese companies off U.S. stock exchanges if they keep hiding their audits from U.S. inspectors, unquote. Here's some more China news. This is fascinating to me because, there's all sorts of news out there. There's things that happen, in specific countries, specific cities every day. And the media, or a relative handful of people in the media, decide if this story is going to be reported and how much attention it's going to be given. And I suppose most important, whether a pattern will be noticed in these stories. A fellow called Cabot Phillips has noted a pattern, and he put it up on Twitter, and I'm using the thread reader. Professors around America have been caught selling secret research to the Chinese communist regime. The national media won't cover it, so here's a thread of those who have been caught so far. This professor was caught selling Air Force and Navy missile secrets to the Chinese. He is facing 219 years in prison. This is a UCLA professor. The head of the chemistry department at Harvard was caught secretly taking $1.5 million from the Chinese to set up a medical research lab in, wait for it, Wuhan. In addition, he was paid up to $50,000 a month for other research he smuggled to the Chinese. This professor from Kansas had 2 research contracts with the Department of Energy. Turns out he was secretly working for the Chinese and smuggling research to them all along. He now faces 50 years in prison. This is Zhao Song Zheng. He was caught trying to smuggle 21 vials of cancer research from a Harvard medical lab to the Chinese government. He now faces 30+ years in prison. This professor from the world-renowned Cleveland Clinic was secretly giving information to the Chinese while receiving $3.6 million in taxpayer funding for his research. This professor in West Virginia took paternity leave and then flew alone to China to secretly conduct research for the government. There, he was given a $500,000 research subsidy along with over $250,000 in living stipends. This professor in Arkansas was applying for a federal research grant from NASA when an investigation showed he was simultaneously receiving payments from the Chinese government. I'm sure it was just an accident that he forgot to disclose that part. This professor in Tennessee faces 6 felony charges after trying to cover up his secret work with the Chinese while applying for a research grant through NASA. This professor in Georgia was fired after it was discovered he tried to cover up money he'd been paid for the Chinese government while conducting research with the National Institutes of Health. We had almost zero evidence of foreign interference in our elections, and half the country freaked out. Now we have endless evidence of foreign interference on our campuses, and no one is batting an eye. People on campus are afraid to question China's influence efforts for fear of being labeled xenophobic or racist. Colleges are so concerned about being called intolerant that they let a communist regime exploit our country. People will call you a conspiracy theorist if you question why China is secretly spending millions on buying off American professors. Ask those people if they believe China is just doing all this out of the goodness of their hearts. And also worth asking, why do 75 American colleges have Chinese Communist Party funded Confucius Institutes on campus? The Pentagon says they're national security threats, and China admits they're propaganda centers. A recent investigation found 48 colleges broke the law in failing to report tens of millions in donations from China. If there's nothing shady, why break the law to hide donations? And what does China gain from donating millions to American colleges? But once again, as always, the real threat is xenophobia. That's what we really have to be worried about. The Chinese embassy in the United States is not happy. And they have issued a statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On May the 20th, U.S. Secretary of State Michael Pompeo issued a statement congratulating Tsai Ing-wen, the leader of the Taiwan region, on her assumption of office. He addressed Tsai as the so-called president and crowed over the so-called U.S. partnership with Taiwan. In addition, some U.S. government officials and politicians sent congratulatory video messages to Tsai. Such moves have severely violated the One China principle and the stipulations of the 3 Sino-U.S. joint communiques. They constituted a gross interference in China's internal affairs. The Chinese side hereby expresses its strong indignation and condemnation. There is only one China in the world, and Taiwan is an inseparable part of the Chinese territory. It is clearly stipulated in the joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations that the United States of America recognizes the government of the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China. The above-mentioned rhetoric and moves by the U.S. have severely violated the One China principle and the stipulations of the 3 joint communiques and run counter to the commitment made by the U.S. government. They have also sent a wrong signal to the Taiwan independence elements and seriously undermined not only the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, but also China-U.S. relations. The Taiwan question concerns China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It is a matter of China's core interest. The Chinese government and people are firm in our determination to oppose separatist activities for so-called Taiwan independence to safeguard China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. We are firm in our determination to oppose any foreign meddling in China's internal affairs. The United States must stop meddling in China's internal affairs and must terminate all moves and rhetoric that may jeopardize cross-strait peace and stability in China-U.S. relations as a whole. China will take necessary measures in response to the aforementioned wrong moves by the U.S. The U.S. side must bear all consequences to arrive therefrom. Well, that's pretty big talk. I would suspect that if People's Republic of China made moves to conquer Taiwan, that, let's say, trade between China and the United States of America would quickly fall to zero, which would not be very good for the Chinese. And the Chinese don't seem to have realized that Barack Obama is not in office anymore. He was a very weak man. Yes, we have lots of panics going on at any one time, and one of them is the myth that black people in America are cowering with fear because white people routinely murder them and get away with it. A young man in Georgia called Ahmaud Arbery was shot to death after he lunged at a shotgun that was pulled on him and tried to remove it from its owner. And the claim was made that he was jogging in this neighborhood, and his jogging involved making many trips to a house under construction. In response to this, a great many progressives and quite a few so-called conservatives actually stated that they violate private property. They trespass on a regular basis. Doesn't everyone do this? Well, no, everyone does not do this, because in many, many jurisdictions in the United States, trespassing on private property will get you shot quite legally. And that's why it's not done. So we find out that this young man had a considerable criminal record. There was a strange footage from a couple of years ago where the police came to him because he'd driven his car into a park onto the grass near railroad tracks. And police thought this was suspicious, and Arbery did not like this intrusion very much. He claimed that he was just, chilling with what people do, in the same way that joggers regularly run through houses under construction. Apparently, people typically drive their cars into parks on the grass to chill out. And there's more. Body camera footage from the arresting officer in Ahmaud Arbery's 2017 arrest for shoplifting a 65-inch TV from a Georgia Walmart has emerged. In the incident, which took place on December 1st, 2017, Arbery and 3 friends attempted to push the Vizio TV out of the store. When they were intercepted by the store workers, they were unable to produce a receipt for the TV. Police were called as the 4 boys loitered in the parking lot. Again, just imagine that you're trying to steal a TV and you're unsuccessful. Well, you run, right? You run. You get as far away from the store as possible. What you don't do is hang around in the parking lot. It's just, I've watched the footage, and it's simply amazing. The arresting officer orders the 4 boys, including Arbery, to sit down on the ground after asking their ages and whether they carried any ID. In the footage, Arbery tells the arresting officer that he was 20 years old when he was actually 23, and the other boys told the police officer that they were 15 and 17. Following the order from the cop to take a seat on the ground, Arbery questions the request, saying he didn't know about no TV. The others protest lightly with mildly expletive remarks. When questioned about the stolen TV from the Walmart, he continues to deny any knowledge of the television allegedly shoplifted from the franchise. A supporting officer later appears alongside an older civilian who points out the culprits to the filming arresting officer. The older civilian tells the arresting officer that they were also robbing bikes from an adjoining patio. A resistant Arbery was arrested for shoplifting, an offense which contravened his pre-existing probation for taking a loaded firearm to a high school basketball game. The other three were released, but warned to never come back to the store. It says here the result of the arrest was unclear, but probation for 5 years is what I read elsewhere. The New York Post reports on this story, but there's an interesting twist here yes, according to WSB-TV in Atlanta, Arbery later pleaded guilty to stealing the TV and was sentenced to 5 years of probation. The release of the footage comes one day after another body cam video shows a confrontation between Arbery a month earlier at a local park. In that video, police attempted to tase Arbery while he's being questioned about sitting in his car in the park. S. Lee Merritt, an attorney for the Arbery family, told the station the video shows the, quote, criminalization of blackness itself, unquote. Arbery, 25, has been the subject of a national outcry over his February 23rd shooting death, allegedly by two white men who, well, it's not allegedly because it's on video, who chased down the unarmed black jogger in their Brunswick neighborhood. Gregory McMichael, a former Glynn County cop and investigator for the district attorney's office, and his 34-year-old son, Travis McMichael, were charged with murder earlier this month after cell phone video of his death went public and caused widespread outrage. The McMichaels claimed they believed Arbery was a suspected burglar after he was spotted at a nearby construction site, which has since become a morbid tourist stop. An extended version of the video released by a lawyer for Arbery's family shows he was chased for more than 4 minutes before Travis McMichael confronted him and shot him twice at close range with a shotgun during a scuffle. That's not something that I would do, which is attempt to take a shotgun from someone's arms. By grabbing the handle, it resulted with a hole being blown in one of Arbery's hands. But, I mean, this criminalization of blackness itself, what is being suggested here? I've got a pretty good idea what is being suggested, but I suppose I have to be very careful in my choice of words. I'll just say there is a sustained effort going on in the United States, the effect of which is to argue that since the American justice system is institutionally racist, and there is nothing that can be done about this, that the American justice system should not be involved in the lives of black people. Quite simply, the cops should not get involved in their lives. Prosecutors should not get involved in their lives. Which is, I don't know, strikes me as being a frightening prospect. Let's look at what is going on in my country, Canada. And we'll look at the numbers. Just over 80,000 cases, confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Canada, 6,030 deaths. And again, I'll remind everyone that Canada is a country of 38 million people. I suppose to some people, the death of 6,030 people over a period of, 3 to 4 months might seem like a crisis, and the government tells us that it's a crisis, it's a catastrophe, so I suppose it must be. But of course, people die of all manner of things in my country that are not COVID-19. Manitoba is still on at 7 deaths, and Saskatchewan at 6. Once again, both these provinces have over 1 million residents. British Columbia has slightly less than 2,500 cases with 149 deaths, and the population of British Columbia is 5.1 million. I have noticed that the restrictions are being, they're ending restrictions, some of them. I noticed that when I moved to this hotel, the restaurant, bar, everything affiliated with it was closed, and I see people moving chairs, moving equipments back in there. So I assume that they're going to start opening them again soon. Oh, I see that Sook, which is a region, it could be called a suburb of Victoria, I guess, to hold in-person graduation ceremonies. Quite brave of them. The Victoria Symphony suspends the 2020 season, promises to move online. Well, that means the Victoria Symphony is dead. Because if you want to listen to classical music, to watch classical music online, there are, millions of videos, often of orchestras, which have a much higher reputation than the Victoria Symphony. Many of them in high definition. They're there for free. So how many people could be expected to pay money to watch the Victoria Symphony on their own computer screen? As Lionel Shriver pointed out in an essay in The Spectator I read last week, that this lockdown effectively means the death of the arts. And I guess the arts are simply not essential. I mean, what do the arts contribute to the GDP anyway? We don't need art. It's surplus to requirements. In fact, any activity which involves people being together in close proximity, we don't need any of that anymore, because it's a virtual world now, and a virtual world is a safer world. And of course, if it saves only one life. Now, okay. Canadians should wear masks when physical distancing is difficult, says Chief Medical Officer. Again, I just got to shake my head about this. Dr. Theresa Tam, who was Canada's Chief Medical Officer, and she was born in China, but that's completely irrelevant. I don't know why I mentioned it. That when the outbreak was first reported in January, Dr. Tam, who is now Canada's greatest hero, said, she repeated what she had been told by the World Health Organization, specifically, no evidence that the virus was transmissible person to person, not a big deal, shouldn't be worried about it, just observe common sense, and above all, reject xenophobia and racism. And then she did a 180 on this. Now, Dr. Tam was previously asked about masks, and she did not think that they were particularly efficacious. She made this clear. Now, however, and this is reported by the CBC, Dr. Theresa Tam provided the updated advice during her daily news conference in Ottawa today. For the spring and summer months, strict adherence to the public health basics of physical distancing, hand washing, and cough etiquette must continue as the bare minimum, she said. In addition, where COVID-19 activity is occurring, use of non-medical masks or face coverings is recommended as an added layer of protection when physical distancing is difficult to maintain. And staying home when sick is a must, always and everywhere. Tam said the new guidelines come as provinces begin to allow businesses and services to reopen, bringing more people out of their homes. Asked if the recommendation should have come earlier in the pandemic emergency, Tam said public health advice has been evolving based on the science. So, we don't have very much data. What should we do? Destroy the economy, destroy society, and suspend civil liberties. And we can do that based on the fact that we will later admit that we didn't have much data. And then we can pat ourselves on the back for the great job that we did. We need to flexibly change our measures as we get more information, she said. Tam said the advice coming from her today is a specific recommendation, while the previous language was more permissive. Oh, and guess who is going to be wearing a mask? Well, our very own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And he's pictured here wearing a mask at a repatriation ceremony for 6 Canadian Armed Forces members killed in a helicopter crash off of Greece on May the 6th. And he looks absolutely ridiculous. You know, I know that there's an awful lot of people in the United States and elsewhere who are absolutely furious that Donald Trump refuses to wear a mask, but he presents a figure of strength. Now, I would guess that Justin Trudeau is very pleased to have a reason to wear a mask because, as we know, the man loves to dress up. I'm wondering if it's possible, maybe this is the next step, that he's going to go full Phantom of the Opera and get the eye mask as well. I think he'd like that. I think he'd like that very much. Now, his wife, Justin Trudeau's wife, had COVID-19, it was reported. And she didn't suffer anything from it. So Trudeau went into isolation. It's supposed to be for 2 weeks, but apparently that wasn't safe enough. And eventually, it was 29 days when he was separated from his wife and 3 children. So why is he wearing a mask? He's obviously been exposed to COVID-19, and he hasn't suffered from it. He says, that's my personal choice. I think that's what is aligned with what public health is recommending. I think we all need to adjust to what works in our circumstances and keep safety at the forefront of what we're doing. Blah, 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 science, science, science. Trudeau said he will wear a mask to in-person sittings of Parliament, but will remove his mask once at his desk to engage in parliamentary debate. You're spreading disease, Justin. Shouldn't you, I've seen people, they hold their smartphone up to their mask and they use it as a speaker. Shouldn't we demand that Justin Trudeau do the same? I mean, if it saves only one life. NDP, a leader, Jagmeet Singh, will be wearing a mask outside of his home in times when physical distancing is hard or not possible. From the beginning of this crisis, he had followed public health experts' advice and will continue to do so. Asked if Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is wearing a mask, a party spokesperson said a number of our MPs have made the personal decision to wear masks on the Hill. Conservative MPs will continue to follow public health guidelines. The World Health Organization has not formally recommended wearing masks and has said the evidence is inconclusive on whether people who are asymptomatic should wear them. Now, wait a minute. YouTube has said, specifically to me, that it's not going to permit content which is at variance with the dictates of the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization says the evidence is inconclusive on whether people who are asymptomatic should wear them. So here we have Justin Trudeau and Theresa Tam flying in the face of the World Health Organization. But I don't understand. I mean, we have the experts disagreeing with experts, and aren't all experts supposed to hold the same views on medical opinions? I wonder if Justin Trudeau knows what the WHO has to say about this. Yeah. So moving on, what did I want to talk about next? I think I wanted to talk about celebrities. We all love celebrities, and in this time of crisis, I guess we have learned how much we need celebrities, how much we depend on them. And since, they aren't allowed to go out in public anymore, for the paparazzi, we all so deeply feel for how they are suffering in their, 25,000 square foot mansions. But a celebrity dispute has broken out over Chrissy Teigen, who used to be a model, but now she is famous for being married to a musician. I think his name is John Legend. And she's very active on Instagram, and there's lots and lots of pictures of herself. And she got into a dispute with a woman called Alison Roman. And we learned a lesson here, another COVID-19 lesson, which is thou shalt not criticize Chrissy Teigen. Maureen Callahan writes in the New York Post, it's a heaping portion of cowardice with a side of reflexive liberal cancel culture, courtesy of our most reliable provider, the New York Times. After their star food columnist was pitchforked online last week for criticizing model and cookbook author Chrissy Teigen and reality TV organizer Maria Kondo, the paper, rather than stand by their writer or have a private conversation with her, is clumsily trying to appease the online masses, publicly placing 34-year-old Alison Roman on leave. Even better, the Times won't say why. We all know the reason. They think Roman was racially insensitive for speaking critically of two Asian women, but the Times won't come out and say it. What kind of social justice warriorhood is that? The controversy, such as it is, God, are we bored in quarantine, unfolded last week when Roman gave an interview to New Consumer. She spoke about her burgeoning fame, the stark difference between the life she's selling online, artisanal, stylish, privileged, and her actual life, one that has her living and working in a third-floor Brooklyn walk-up with no dishwasher and no second house upstate. For a Times denizen, that's deprivation. I do need to figure out how to turn this into money, Roman said straight up. In talking about ways she would and wouldn't commodify her brand, Roman criticized Kondo, 35, and Teigen, 34. Kondo, Roman said, decided to capitalize on her fame as the guru of decluttering and make stuff that you can buy that is completely antithetical to everything she's ever taught you. Yes, true. Marie Kondo, who has built an empire telling us to throw out everything we own that doesn't, quote, spark joy, unquote, whatever that means, now sells tuning forks for $75, an organic meditation floor cushion for $169, a French flax hypoallergenic linen kimono robe, $115, a deck of Inner Compass Love Mediation cards, $55, and a Zen egg for $40, along other goopy flotsam and jetsam on her website, shop.conmarie.com. Teigen, Roman said, had parlayed a successful cookbook into Boom, line at Target, Boom. Now she has an Instagram page that has over 1 million followers where it's just like people running a content farm for her. That horrifies me, and it's not something that I ever want to do. I don't aspire to that, but like, who's laughing now? Because she's making a ton of effing money. This is Roman's opinion. Since when are we not allowed to have opinions, let alone voice them? Come on, get with the new normal there, Maureen Callahan. Also, let's be real. This is ultimately complimentary. Roman is admitting that she wants what Teigen has, which is a ton of effing money. That said, part of the interview could be interpreted as problematic. Right after ripping into Kondo, Roman impersonated an infomercial hustler, saying in part, "Please to buy my cutting board." Since some have taken that as Roman mocking an Asian person's attempt at English, Roman denied that on Twitter, saying it was a reference to Please to the Table, an Eastern European cookbook. So, what happened then was Chrissy Teigen, oh, woe is me, people being mean to me, notwithstanding the fact that Chrissy Teigen makes a habit of punching down, as they say, on social media. And Alison Roman, I suppose, understanding the tidal wave that was soon to sweep her away, apologized profusely. Yes. You know who decidedly isn't offended? Teigen, who is set to executive produce Roman's forthcoming cooking show. On Tuesday, she took to Twitter to voice her displeasure at Roman's suspension. "I'm not happy with the New York Times leave," she said. "It just sucks in every way. I don't like this one bit, and I'm doing what I can," off Twitter, to make that known. Yes, I suppose Chrissy Teigen is absolutely devastated by this, because people are generally devastated when they learn, to their surprise, just how powerful they really are. And again, who is Chrissy Teigen and how did she get to be such a powerful person? And People magazine, or Knee Pads as it's known in the business, has an entire story about Chrissy Teigen supposedly being terribly upset at Alison Roman being put on hiatus from the New York Times. And finally, in Chrissy Teigen news, you see, I'm sure a lot of listeners are rather surprised that I pay any attention to this, but I mean, you really do have to pay attention to it in order to understand the modern world, because there are, in the United States, there are tens of millions of people, mostly women, but some men, whose lives revolve around celebrities. And I don't know, their love of celebrities somehow validates them, that they pay relentless attention to their Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and they truly influence their lives. In fact, they have more influence on the lives of these people than, I don't know, their husbands or wives or children as need be. So this is from BuzzFeed, and that wacky Chrissy Teigen just can't keep away from controversy. Responding to a fan who said they saw her buying a Celine bag at Barney's so she wouldn't feel guilty about asking to use the bathroom, Chrissy said the situation is very true all too often. And she added, wow, wow, wow. That Chrissy Teigen, oh yeah, no one at Barney's would know who Chrissy Teigen is. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry, young lady, we do not allow patrons to use the facilities unless they bought a $3,000 bag. Yes, and so people began mocking her, talking about buying a McFlurry at McDonald's, or some McNuggets, small soda at McDonald's. And then, I don't know, the knives came out. Men respect her tweets. This is one of those tacky, non-self-aware millionaire tweets. This is actually not endearing, like at all, writes Daniel Chick. Several people pointed out that the tweet could come across insensitive at a time when many people are losing their jobs and facing financial difficulties due to the coronavirus. Jennifer Wilcott responded, and for the rest of us, that's buying a candy bar at Chevron and not loving the waste of $3. This tweet sucks. I've always defended you, and you still feel inclined to. Not that you need me to, but this is gross. Everybody lost their jobs. A Celine bag is $3,000. Someone from Britain writes, nah, but really, meantime, some of us are struggling to pay bills, and this one is paying £2,000 to take a piss. Tone deaf. Read the room, Chrissy Love. And finally, someone called Anisha tweets, rich people live in a different reality. And yes, last week, Chrissy made her Twitter account private after some very public drama with fellow food writer Allison Roman, causing people to direct hate at both Chrissy and her children. Oh, poor Chrissy. And she is pictured here with her husband and her children on a couch, and Chrissy has taken the opportunity not to get dressed. I think a lot of people are using this pandemic as an excuse to never get dressed. There's no smoking in my hotel, and yesterday morning, I could hardly believe it. A man came out of the front door, and he was obviously staying at the hotel because he was wearing the dressing gown, the complimentary dressing gown, and the slippers which are provided. Now, this dressing gown, is clearly best worn by a woman because it rides rather high on the legs. And he was out there in the dressing gown and slippers, smoking a cigarette, and get dressed. Nah, not getting dressed. Not getting dressed today. Maybe I'm not getting dressed ever again. A final look at the chat. Let's go here. Edward Richardson says it's not complicated. When you owe $100,000 to the federal government for a master's in fine arts in poetry from Columbia, like my ex-wife, you owe $100K to the feds. And YT says if we were willing to shut the world down, sit back and see what happens, we should be willing to cancel the student debt, sit back and watch the fallout. Well, I suppose part of the fallout would be that, 50-75% of universities and colleges in the United States would close because, the universities and colleges are pimping the federal government's student debt. Don't think you can afford to go to university? Don't want to get a job to save up for a university? Don't want to work, have a part-time job when you're a student? Don't worry. Uncle Sam's going to come through with all the money you need. And, yeah, by the way, this this loan is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Since you asked, we have to tell you, but we don't like to talk about that very much. Anyway. Okay. Universities will get paid in tomatoes, says Lacombe. Yeah. In tomatoes, buy tomatoes for tomatoes. Mr. Tradsky says 2020 is going to be one for the ages. You know, it's funny. When I used to be on Luke Ford's show, and that fellow Kyle was on, he was always talking up Steven Pinker and, you know, life, human happiness, all this was going like this, and it was continued to go like this. And just a few months after that, after he was saying that sort of thing, it's all over. It's all over, just like that. And, you know, why did that happen? Was it because of, you know, God's wrath? Were there earthquakes, tsunamis, and hurricanes all over the world? Or was it a situation like in Anthony Burgess's novel, The Wanting Seed, where God punishes the world by killing the life on it, the plant life, the fish, etc., because man in his selfishness is refusing to procreate? No, it's because of a computer model. Yeah, because of a computer model written in C, undocumented C. 13 years ago, the world got shut down. And I'd say that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what happened. And it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing that it's not really possible for us to predict the future, as you know, the failure of these models show. But it's very strange. It's very strange that the governments, you know, the media and the elites, they seem to be rooting for the models. Got to get those numbers up. We wouldn't want the modelers to be embarrassed. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about a movie from just a few months ago on Netflix, and it stars the lovely Alison Brie, and it's called Horse Girl, and it's an attempt to show what schizophrenia is like from the point of view of the schizophrenic. And so thank you all very much for tuning in today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you would like to support this program, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, that's kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I will leave you with my now traditional benediction and farewell in these times of total social atomization. I do dearly hope that all of you manage to find some genuine human connection. Good night, all.